This program is being brought to you by His Word Heals, which can be found at hiswordheals.com, on Hebrew Nation Radio, and on Messianic Lamb Radio's YouTube channel under the His Word Heals playlist. Isaiah 28:10 through 13. For precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little and there a little. For with stammering lips and another tongue will he speak to his people, to whom he said, This is the rest wherewith ye may cause the weary to rest, and this is the refreshing, yet they would not hear. But the word of Yahweh was unto them precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little and there a little, that they might go and fall backward, and be broken and snared and taken. That is what we strive to do in all of our programs. We cite lots of scripture for the basis of our conclusions, precept upon precept, line upon line, and this program will be no different. To understand the message we are trying to convey, we ask that you please listen or watch each of our programs in their entirety, if at all possible, even if in small segments, in order that the complete message is conveyed in context. Even if you might think at the beginning of our programs that you've heard it all before, perhaps there is something further along that you had not considered, but that opens a whole new understanding of Scripture for you. That is our prayer, that our programs would be edification, food, from the word of Yahweh, not from us, to all of his people. Today's program will be part 3 of a 4-part series going completely through the book of Esther. In part 1, we went through chapter 1 of the book of Esther and laid the groundwork to make the case that the book of Esther is very prophetic. In part 2, we looked at chapter 2, where we also saw some very surprising parallels that may help clarify events that will come to pass during the tribulation. Today, in part 3, we will start with chapter 3 and compare several of the events in Esther to prophesied events in Revelation. Today we will speed up a bit, though, and continue through chapter 7, as many of these comparable themes are developed through larger sections of the story of Esther. Remember, we are commanded to fear not, because the spirit of fear is not from Yahweh, but from the enemy. So let's get started. Here's a quick review of part 2 so that we start part 3 in context of what we've already looked at. In part 2, we made several comparisons, including 1. Queen Vashti, who was cast away from the king's presence, to those who will be cast into outer darkness. Number 2, the guardian of the women who helped prepare the virgins to come before the king, to the Ruach who has been sent to prepare the bride of Yeshua. Number 3, the king's officers who were sent to gather the lovely young virgins from throughout his kingdom, to the messengers or angels who are sent throughout prophecy to gather Yahweh's elect from the 4 corners of the earth. And 4, Esther being singled out from among the virgins to become queen, while the other virgins were still in the king's house, but were concubines rather than queen, to the 2 groups in Revelation. Esther equaling the 144,000 singled out from among all believers before the great multitude, equaling the rest of the virgins, that appeared in heaven in white robes. Then Mordecai, who kept an eye on the welfare of Esther as she was being prepared for the king, to Yeshua, the Lamb of Yahweh, keeping an eye on the welfare of his bride. 6. 2 of the king's doorkeepers, convicted of planning to commit treason, were hanged on wooden structures, to the 2 criminals that were crucified on wooden structures next to Yeshua. And today we will compare Mordecai, in that Haman planned to hang him on a wooden structure, to Yeshua, whom Hasatan thought he was going to destroy when crucifying him on the wooden structure. Like Hasatan, Haman didn't realize that he would not be successful in destroying Mordecai, but that instead Haman would be the one hanged or destroyed on his own wooden structure, just as ultimately the cross or wooden structure that was intended to destroy Yeshua is what ultimately destroys Hasatan. If you have not listened to parts 1 and 2 on Hebrew Nation Radio, or watched the first and second videos on Lamb Network's YouTube channel under the His Word Healed playlist, I recommend that you do so that you understand where we started from, and everything will hopefully make more sense to you. But first, let's start where we left off at Esther chapter 3, verse 1. After these events, sovereign or King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and exalted him and seated him higher than all the princes with him. Does this remind you of anyone? Compare Ezekiel 28:14. Thou art the anointed cherub that covers, and I have set thee so. Thou were upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Isaiah 14:12. How thou art fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning! How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations! For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High. Here we see that Haman was exalted higher than all of the other princes. And in Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14, we saw that Lucifer was the covering or highest angel in heaven. Haman, like Lucifer, was very prideful and wanted to be exalted even higher. In fact, Haman wanted everyone in the kingdom to bow to him. Esther 3:2. And all the king's servants who were in the king's gate bowed and did obeisance or worship to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or do worship. Compare that to Matthew 4:8-10. Again, the devil taketh him, Yeshua, up into an exceedingly high mountain, and showed him all the kingdoms of the world, and the glory of them, and said unto him, Yeshua, all these things I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me. Then said Yeshua unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, or Yahweh thy Elohim, and him only shalt thou serve. So Haman wanted everyone, including Mordecai, to bow to him. Mordecai would not bow to Haman. Hasatan wanted even Yeshua to bow to him in the wilderness, but like Mordecai, Yeshua would not bow to Satan either. Then in Esther 3:3-4 says, And the king's servants who were in the king's gate said to Mordecai, Why do you disobey the king's command? And it came to be, when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told Haman to see whether the words of Mordecai would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew or a Yehudi. Compare this to John 11:48. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and our nation. Of course, these were the Pharisees who were in power. They were the religious leaders of the time. Then we also see Revelation 13:4. And they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast? Who is able to fight with him? So in this comparison, we're looking at those servants in the king's gate who actually worshipped Haman. They told on Mordecai because he would not worship Haman, and they wanted to see if Mordecai would actually get away with disobeying the order to worship Haman. Then we're comparing that to John 11:48, where the Pharisees were afraid of losing their position with the Romans and within the Jewish nation because of Yeshua. I think those leaders within the gate were also afraid of losing their position because Mordecai didn't have to worship Haman, so they thought maybe Mordecai had special status. Then in Revelation 13:4, we see that many will worship the dragon for fear of the beast's power. So I think that's the only reason that the servants in the king's gate worshipped Haman, because they were in fear of not worshiping him because of his power. Esther 3:5. through 6. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or do worship, Haman was filled with wrath. But it was despicable in his eyes to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had informed him of the people of Mordecai. Therefore Haman sought to destroy all the Yehudim who were throughout all of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. Compare this to Revelation 12:17. And the dragon was angry with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of Elohim, and have the testimony of Yeshua Messiah. So in Esther 3:5 through 6, Haman was filled with wrath because Mordecai would not bow to him. So Haman sought to destroy both Mordecai and all of his people. In Revelation 12:17, we see that the dragon is wroth or angry with the woman, Israel, and seeks to destroy the remnant of her seed that testify of and obey Yeshua, the remnant of Yeshua's people. Esther chapter 3, verses 7 through 15. In the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, the lot, before Haman from day to day and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of the kingdom. And their laws are diverse from all people, neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand, and gave it unto Haman the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, The silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to thee. Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, and to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province, according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, in the name of King Ahasuerus was it written and sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by posts or messengers into all the king's provinces, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. The posts or messengers went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. So compare this to Revelation 13:7. And it was given to him to fight with the set-apart ones and to overcome them. And authority was given to him over every tribe and tongue and nation. The him, of course, here being the anti-Messiah, the lawless one, the beast, and all those dwelling on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life of the slain Lamb from the foundations of the world shall worship him. So let's compare again. Esther 3:7 through 15. Haman cast lots for the best timing to approach the king and gain authorization to destroy the people of Mordecai, the Jews. And so there was a certain time that this would be approved. Authority was given to Haman to destroy or overcome Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the entire kingdom at this certain time. Then in Revelation 13:7 through 8, the anti-Messiah is given authority to fight with Yahweh's chosen people throughout the entire earth and to overcome or destroy them. And there is a certain time that this decree is allowed to go out. Like Haman, the anti-Messiah will demand worship, and like those that sat in the king's gate, everyone not written in the book of life will bow to him in worship. Esther 4:1 through 8. And Mordecai learned of all that had been done, and Mordecai tore his garments and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and cried out with a loud and bitter cry. And he went up to the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate wearing sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and decree came, there was great mourning among the Yehudim, and fasting, and weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. And Esther's young women and eunuchs came and told her. And the queen was deeply pained, and sent garments to Mordecai to wear, and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he refused. And Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend her, and she gave him a command concerning Mordecai to learn what and why this was. And Hathach went out to Mordecai to an open space of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that befell him, and all about the silver that Haman promised to pay into the king's treasuries to destroy the Yehudim. And he gave him a copy of the written decree to destroy them, which was given at Shushan, to show to Esther and explain it to her, and to command her to go in to the king to make supplication to him, and to plead before him for her people. Compare this to Revelation 8:3 and 4. And another messenger came and stood at the slaughter place or altar, holding a golden censer, and much incense was given to him, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the set apart ones upon the golden slaughter place or altar, which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the set apart ones went up before Elohim from the hand of the messenger. So in Esther chapter 4, verses 1 through 8, Mordecai sent a petition on behalf of his people through the king's eunuch to Queen Esther. In Revelation 8, 3 and 4, the prayers or petitions of the set-apart ones, or saints, went up before Elohim from the hand of the messenger of Yahweh. Esther 4, 9 through 6, 14. And Hathach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai, and Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law, to be put to death, except the one whom the king holds out the golden scepter, who then shall live. But I have not been called to come in before the king these 30 days. And they declared to Mordecai the words of Esther. And Mordecai commanded them to answer Esther, "Do not think within yourself to escape the king's palace, in the king's palace, any more than all the other Yehudim. For if you keep entirely silent at this time, relief and deliverance shall arise for the Yehudim from another place, while you and your father's house perish. And who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" And Esther commanded to reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Yehudim who are present in Shushan, and go fast for me, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I too and my young women shall fast in the same way. Then I shall go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went away and did according to all that Esther commanded him. And it came to be on the 3rd day that Esther put on royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house opposite the entrance of the house. And it came to be when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his eyes, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter which was in his hand. And Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther, and what is your request? Up to half my kingdom, and it is given to you." And Esther answered, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the feast which I have prepared for him." And the king said, "Get Haman at once to do as Esther has said." Then the king and Haman went to the feast which Esther had prepared. And the king said to Esther at the feast of wine, "What is your petition? And it is given to you. And what is your request? Up to half my kingdom, and it is done." And Esther answered and said, "My petition and request is this: if I have found favor in the eyes of the king, and if it pleases the king to give my petition and perform my request, then let the king and Haman come to the feast which I make for them. And tomorrow I shall do according to the word of the king." And Haman went out that day rejoicing and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. But Haman held himself in, and came to his house, and he sent and called for his loved ones, and Zeresh his wife. And Haman recounted to them the glory of his wealth, and his many sons, and all in which the king had promoted him, and how he had exalted him above the officials and servants of the kingdom. And Haman said, besides Esther the queen, let no one but me come in with the king to the feast which she prepared, and tomorrow too I am invited by her, along with the king. But all this does not suit me, as long as I see Mordecai the Yehudi sitting at the king's gate. So his wife Zerah and all his loved ones said to him, let a wooden structure be made 50 cubits high, and in the morning speak to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it, and go with the king to the feast, rejoicing. And the word pleased Haman, and he had the wooden structure built. On that night the sleep of the king fled, and he commanded to bring the book of the records of the annals, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigtha and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers, who had sought to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. Then the king said, what has been done in value or in greatness to Mordecai for this? And the king's servants who attended him said, nothing has been done for him. And the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had come into the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king to hang Mordecai on the wooden structure that had been prepared for him. And the king's servant said to him, look, Haman is standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. And when Haman came in, the king asked him, what is to be done for the man whom the sovereign delights to value? Now Haman thought in his heart, whom would the king delight to value more than me? And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delights to value, let a royal robe be brought which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, one with royal crest on its head. And let this robe and horse be given into the hand of one of the king's most noble princes. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to value, and make him ride on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, this is done to the man whom the king delights to value. And the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robe and the horse as you have spoken, and do so for Mordecai the Yehudi, who sits in the king's gate. Let no word fail of all that you have spoken. And Haman took the robe and the horse, and robed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square, and proclaimed before him, thus it is done to the man the king delights to value. Then Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house mourning, and with his head covered. And when Haman related to his wife Zeresh and all his loved ones all that had befallen him, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is from the seed of the Yehudim, you are not going to prevail against him, but certainly fall before him. While they were still speaking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hurried to bring Haman to the feast which Esther had prepared. Let us be glad and rejoice and give him praise. Now let's compare that to Revelation 19:7, which says, let us be glad and rejoice and give him praise, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his wife prepared herself, and to her it was given to be dressed in fine linen and bright, for fine linen is the righteousness of the set-apart ones. And he said to me, right, blessed are those who have been called to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he said to me, these are the true words of Elohim. And I saw the heaven opened, and there was a white horse, and he who sat on him was called trustworthy and true, and in righteousness he judges and fights. And his eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, having a name that had been written, which no one had perceived except himself, and having been dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of Yahweh, and the armies of in the heaven, dressed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. And out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that with it should smite the nations, and he shall shepherd them with a rod of iron. So that was a lot of scripture to digest, but in summary, Esther 4:9 through Esther 6:14, all the Jews fast, and Esther goes before the king and finds favor and asks to prepare a feast for him. She also invites Haman. Haman was gloating that he was invited to the feasts of Esther with the king. Haman built gallows to hang Mordecai from, and Haman was forced by the king to honor Mordecai with royal robes and a royal horse to ride upon for all to see. Then in Revelation 7 through 15, we see that those that are called to the marriage supper of the Lamb are blessed. And most importantly, Yeshua is seen in heaven riding a white horse, a royal horse, like Mordecai was honored to ride upon, dressed in a robe dipped in blood, or royal robes, just as Mordecai was clothed in royal robes to ride upon a horse. Something pretty important to note from the scriptures we just read, we see that there was a time when Mordecai, Queen Esther, and all the Yehudim had to fast and pray in order that Queen Esther would be successful and find favor in the king's eyes when she had to come before him unsummoned in order to save her people. Likewise, I believe there is a time coming when we, all of Yahweh's people, will need to fast and pray and follow protocol and come before our King, our Messiah, come before Yahweh with our petition, with the prayers of the saints, to be delivered up before him in order that we might be saved from the destruction that is decreed upon us by the adversary during the time that is given to him to come against us and to prevail. We will need to fast and pray and bring our petition before Yahweh in the right manner and the right protocol in order that we will be saved and be victorious and be able to fight back against his planned destruction for us. But continuing on, let's read Esther chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. And the king and Haman came in to drink with Queen Esther, and again on the second day, at the feast of wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? And it is given to you. And what is your request? Up to half of my kingdom, and it is done." And Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be cut off, to be killed, and to be destroyed. And if we had been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept silent, although the adversary could not make up for the king's loss." Then King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he whose heart is set to do so?" And Esther said, "The adversary and enemy is this evil Haman." Then Haman was afraid before the king and queen. And the king, arising in his wrath from the feast of wine, went into the palace garden. And Haman remained before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil had been decided against him by the king. And when the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the feast of wine, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, "Also to ravish the queen while I am in the house?" As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, "Also see the wooden structure, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king, is standing at the house of Haman." And the king said, "Impale him on it." And they hanged Haman on the wooden structure that he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's wrath abated. Now compare that to Revelation 20, verses 1 through 3, and Revelation 13:10. Revelation 20, verse 1. "And I saw a messenger coming down from heaven, having the key to the pit of the deep and a great chain in his hand. And he seized the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he threw him into the pit of the deep, and shut him up, and set a seal on him, so that he should lead the nations no more astray until the 1,000 years were ended. And after that he has to be released for a little while." Revelation 13:10. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. So in recap, Esther 7 verses 1 through 10, Haman attends Queen Esther's second feast with the king. Esther reveals her true identity. She is not a pagan queen, but is actually an Israelite, a Jew, part of Yahweh's set-apart people, and part of the people that Haman had plotted to destroy. And she exposes Haman's plot to destroy her and her people. Haman is then seized and hanged upon the very gallows he built to hang Mordecai on. Thus he received the destruction he had planned for Mordecai. In Revelation 20 verses 1 through 3 and Revelation 13:10, the serpent is seized and thrown into the bottomless pit, just as Haman was seized and destroyed. And just as Haman received the destruction he intended for Mordecai and the Jews, what is sown by our enemies will be reaped by our enemies. So we've come to the end of today's program, but our next program will be number 4 in the series of 4, so it'll be our final program, and we're going to look at the following prophetic pictures. Esther 8 through 10, chapters 8 through 10. Mordecai and Queen Esther are saved, promoted, and given a signet ring. A new decree goes out allowing Mordecai and Esther's people to defend themselves and destroy those that would come against them. Mordecai and Esther's people overcome and destroy their enemies. Then Haman's 10 sons are killed and then also hanged, reaping double. Queen Esther inherits the house of Haman, and the Feast of Purim is decreed. Again, one of the most important things I think we can take away from this series on Esther is that what the enemy had planned for Mordecai, what Haman had planned for Mordecai, Haman ended up reaping, just as what Hasatan had planned for Yeshua, the destruction of Yeshua, he ultimately reaps. The cross was intended for the destruction of Yeshua and all of Yeshua's people, because without Yeshua we cannot be saved. But instead, the cross ended up solidifying the destruction of our enemy. So the destruction that the enemy had planned for us and for Yeshua, he ends up reaping that destruction from the cross. I really hope that this message and this comparison that we see in the book of Esther is helping to give everyone courage for what will be coming someday upon the earth, for the destruction that Hasatan has planned for Yahweh's people. We should not fear. We are told not to fear, and we can see that according to the prophetic pictures in Queen Esther, everything will work out for those that have faith in Yeshua, faith in Yahweh, who come to him with their petitions. There is a plan worked out for our ultimate victory over the wiles of the devil, as they say. And so we should not fear. We need to be in the scripture, immersed in the scripture, immersed in prayer. There will come a time of fasting and prayer that all of us will need to participate in, and there will come a time of deliverance where Yeshua will deliver his people, where we will be delivered from the plans of the enemy, where we will be able to fight back and become victorious through the blood of Yeshua and what he has already done for us on the cross. That cross of destruction is actually the cross of destruction for the enemy, and we just need to have our faith in what was done so long ago on that wooden structure, what Yeshua did for us by overcoming the destruction on the wooden structure and becoming resurrected, raised from the dead to be victorious over the enemy Hasatan, just as Mordecai and Queen Esther were victorious over Haman and his planned destruction. So if you haven't done so yet, please visit our website at www.hiswordheals.com. We have free books and free healing scripture CD with music, and many of our past programs are also there. Please also visit Messianic Lamb Radio's YouTube channel called The Lamb Network, and we have a His Word Heals playlist on there where you can see all of these videos and many more. And thank you for listening on Hebrew Nation Radio or watching on Lamb Network's YouTube channel. If you have been blessed, please consider donating to these ministries to keep them going and on the air. Blessings and shalom to all of you and everyone in your home.